The rain began before dawn and showed no intention of stopping. Gray clouds hung low over the town of Blackthorn Crossing, swallowing the church steeple, darkening the cobblestone streets, and turning the marketplace into a river of mud. Shopkeepers peered from behind fogged windows. Merchants gathered beneath awnings. Housewives carrying baskets slowed their pace as they approached the square, not because they wished to avoid the storm, but because they wished to witness something far crueler. At the center of the square stood an iron cage. Rainwater streamed down its rusted bars. Inside sat a woman, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, once known throughout the county as one of the most admired young duchesses in England, sat upon the damp wooden floor with her back straight and her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her pale blue gown, once elegant enough for royal receptions, was stained with mud and weeks of neglect. Strands of golden hair escaped from beneath her bonnet and clung to her cheeks. The cold had stolen much of the color from her face, yet nothing could diminish the quiet dignity in her posture. Above the cage hung a weathered wooden sign. The black letters were large enough for every passerby to read. Prostitute Duchess. The words had become a form of entertainment. Children pointed. Men laughed. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Many who gathered there had never exchanged a single conversation with Eleanor, yet they repeated rumors with astonishing confidence. Disgraceful. I always suspected something was wrong with her. Imagine the shame she brought upon her husband. The accusations drifted through the rain like poison. Eleanor heard every one of them. Weeks earlier, their words would have wounded her beyond endurance. Now they merely settled upon her shoulders like another layer of rain. She had learned a terrible truth. People rarely hated evidence. They hated vulnerability. Once society decided someone had fallen, many found comfort in helping them remain there. An elderly woman stopped near the cage and shook her head. What a pity! Eleanor almost smiled. Pity was often delivered with the same cruelty as hatred. The old woman moved on. The crowd continued to grow. A young mother pulled her daughter closer and pointed toward the cage. That is what becomes of women who forget their place. The little girl stared at Eleanor with wide, uncertain eyes. Unlike the adults, she looked confused rather than cruel. Eleanor met the child's gaze. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then the girl offered the smallest of smiles. Her mother quickly dragged her away. The tiny gesture warmed Eleanor more than the blanket she had been denied. Not everyone had forgotten kindness. The memory carried her elsewhere. Only a year earlier she had crossed this very square in a carriage lined with velvet cushions. Townspeople had waved. Shopkeepers had bowed. Children had run alongside her horses. Back then, she had been celebrated. Lady Eleanor had financed a new orphanage. She had paid medical expenses for struggling families. During a harsh winter, she had distributed coal to dozens of homes. People had called her generous, compassionate, beloved. Now those same voices called her a disgrace. The speed of the transformation might have been unbelievable had she not lived through it herself. Thunder rolled across the sky. A group of young men approached the cage. One tossed a bruised apple through the bars. It struck the floor beside her feet. Laughter followed. Another man stepped forward. "Why so quiet today, Duchess?" More laughter. Eleanor lifted her eyes calmly. "I have discovered that truth requires very few words." The reply silenced him for a moment. Then embarrassment transformed into anger. He spat onto the ground and retreated. The crowd resumed its murmuring. Inside, Eleanor felt exhaustion creeping through every part of her body. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. The exhaustion of defending innocence to people determined to believe guilt. The accusations against her had spread like wildfire months earlier. Lord Nathaniel Graves, one of the wealthiest noblemen in the region, had once pursued her relentlessly. His gifts had arrived weekly. Flowers, jewelry, letters. Each one had been politely returned. Eleanor had loved her husband. There had never been another choice. Nathaniel's pride had not survived rejection gracefully. Soon whispers emerged, then anonymous letters. Then witnesses appeared claiming to have seen things that never occurred. Forged documents followed. By the time Eleanor understood what was happening, The rumors had already become accepted fact. The cruelest part was that her husband had died unexpectedly before the truth could be uncovered. A fever had stolen him within days. Without his protection, she became easy prey. The courts listened to lies. Society embraced scandal. And the woman who had spent years helping others found herself abandoned by nearly everyone she had once called friend. Rain continued hammering against the cage. Hours passed. The square remained crowded. People came and went as though visiting a theatrical performance. No one noticed Eleanor's trembling hands. No one noticed how little she had eaten. No one cared. The cage existed to reassure them. As long as someone else occupied it, they could pretend they never might. Then, shortly after noon, something changed. The distant sound of horses echoed through the square. Heads turned. A magnificent black carriage emerged through the rain. Its polished surface gleamed despite the storm. For powerful horses pulled it steadily across the cobblestones. The crest upon its door was immediately recognizable. Conversation stopped. Even the mockery faded. The carriage belonged to Duke Sebastian Hawthorne. For 3 years the Duke had rarely appeared in public. Ever since the death of his wife, grief had transformed him into a near legend. Some claimed he spent entire months alone inside his vast estate. Others said he had abandoned society altogether. Yet here he was, returning at last. The carriage rolled through the marketplace. Its wheels splashed through puddles. People bowed instinctively. Shopkeepers removed their hats. The vehicle continued forward until it reached the center of the square, until it reached the cage, until it reached Eleanor. Then, unexpectedly, the carriage stopped. The crowd exchanged puzzled glances. Inside the carriage, a tall figure became visible through the rain-streaked window. A man dressed entirely in black. A man whose own sorrow had become famous throughout the kingdom. For a long moment, he simply looked toward the cage. Toward the woman beneath the hateful sign, toward the Duchess the world had abandoned. And for the first time in many months, Eleanor felt something unfamiliar stir inside her weary heart. Not hope. Hope had become far too dangerous, but perhaps the faintest shadow of curiosity. Because Duke Sebastian Hawthorne was not laughing, and he was not looking away. The rain softened to a steady drizzle. Yet the silence that settled over Blackthorn Crossing felt heavier than the storm itself. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye remained fixed upon the black carriage, standing before the cage. The door opened. A polished boot touched the wet cobblestones. Then Duke Sebastian Hawthorne stepped into the square. He was taller than Eleanor had imagined, broad-shouldered and solemn, dressed in a perfectly tailored black coat that seemed to absorb the gray light around him. His dark hair was touched by rain, and his expression carried the unmistakable weight of a man who had spent years living beside grief. The crowd parted instinctively. Power had a way of creating space. Sebastian ignored them all. His gaze never left the cage, never left Eleanor. He walked slowly through the mud until he stood directly before the rusted bars. For several moments, he said nothing. Neither did she. The square seemed to hold its breath. Most expected ridicule. Others expected disgust. Instead, the Duke removed his gloves. The gesture was simple, yet in a society obsessed with status and contamination, it felt strangely intimate. His eyes studied her face, not with suspicion, not with judgment, as though he were searching for something. Finally he spoke. "Madam, have they permitted you anything to eat today?" The question struck the square harder than thunder. A stunned silence followed. Eleanor blinked. Of all the things she had expected, kindness had not been among them. "No, Your Grace," she answered softly. A shadow crossed his face. "When was your last meal?" She hesitated. "Yesterday morning." Several women in the crowd lowered their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably. The Duke slowly turned toward the town councilman, standing nearby beneath a covered awning. His voice remained calm. "She has been displayed before the public without food." One councilman cleared his throat. "The punishment was deemed appropriate, Your Grace." Sebastian regarded him for a long moment. The man's confidence quickly disappeared. Then the Duke turned back toward Eleanor. Rain dripped from the iron bars between them. "You must be cold." A faint smile touched her lips. That observation hardly requires noble investigation. To the surprise of everyone present, including Eleanor herself, the Duke almost smiled. It was brief, gone in an instant. It transformed his face. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the grief. A man who remembered how to laugh. The crowd watched in disbelief. They had expected condemnation. Instead, they were witnessing conversation. Human conversation, as though the woman inside the cage remained worthy of it. Sebastian removed his coat. Gasps spread through the square. Before anyone could react, he folded the expensive garment and carefully pushed it through the bars. Eleanor stared. The coat alone was likely worth more than many townspeople earned in months. I cannot accept this. You can. Your Grace. You are shivering. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not romance. Not yet. Only recognition. The recognition of one lonely soul encountering another. Slowly, Eleanor accepted the coat. Its warmth felt almost shocking. She had forgotten what kindness felt like. The Duke stepped back. Then he did something even more unexpected. He began asking questions. Not theatrical questions. Not questions meant for public display. Real questions. When had the accusations begun? Who had first reported them? Which witnesses had testified? Who financed the investigation? At first, the townspeople answered confidently. But as the questioning continued, certainty began to crumble. One merchant claimed he had personally witnessed scandalous behavior. Another swore the incident occurred on a completely different date. A third described an entirely different location. Contradictions appeared everywhere. Sebastian listened carefully. He missed nothing. The more he listened, the darker his expression became. Eleanor noticed it. He was not simply being polite. He was investigating. For the first time in months, someone was examining the story instead of accepting it. The realization frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. Because hope remained dangerous. Hope had teeth. Hope could wound when it died. The questioning continued for nearly an hour. By the end, even members of the crowd appeared uncertain. Rumors sounded less convincing when forced into daylight. At last, Sebastian turned toward the mayor, a short, nervous man whose confidence had steadily evaporated. I would like to know who currently owns this cage. The mayor blinked. The cage, Your Grace? Yes. The town council. Sebastian nodded. And what is its value? Confused murmurs spread through the square. The mayor looked baffled. Value? The price. The man swallowed. Surely you are not suggesting. The price. The mayor nervously named a figure. It was intended to discourage him. Instead, Sebastian reached into his coat pocket. He produced a leather wallet. Inside were several banknotes. The amount exceeded the requested price by a considerable margin. The mayor stared. So the cage belongs to me now, Sebastian said. No one spoke. The entire square seemed frozen. Even Eleanor struggled to understand what was happening. The mayor cleared his throat. Your Grace, perhaps there is some misunderstanding. There is. The Duke's voice remained perfectly calm. A very large one. He handed over the money. The transaction was completed. Just like that. The cage had changed ownership. Whispers erupted instantly. Shock swept through the crowd. Some laughed nervously. Others stared in disbelief. Several women covered their mouths. The scandal was growing by the second. The grieving Duke had just purchased the cage containing the kingdom's most disgraced woman. Sebastian approached the door. The rusty lock hung from its chain. Rainwater dripped from the metal. For a brief moment, he simply looked at it. Then he removed a key handed to him by the mayor. The crowd collectively inhaled. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. Surely he would not. The lock clicked open. The sound seemed to echo across the entire square. Sebastian pulled the cage door outward. No one moved. No one even breathed. He extended his hand. Not toward a criminal. Not toward an outcast. Toward a lady. Toward Eleanor. Madam. Her throat tightened. She stared at the offered hand. Months of humiliation told her this moment could not be real. Yet remained there. Steady. Patient. Waiting. I fear the town may object, she whispered. A flicker of amusement appeared in his eyes. The town appears to object to many things. A few nearby listeners flushed red. Eleanor looked at his hand once more. Then she slowly placed her fingers into his. His grip was gentle, respectful. He helped her step from the cage. For the first time in weeks, her feet touched open ground. The square erupted. Gasps, arguments, shouts, disbelief. But Sebastian ignored every voice. He removed the hateful wooden sign from above the cage, the one that had haunted her days and nights. Without ceremony, he dropped it into the mud. The gesture felt more powerful than a speech. Eleanor stared at the shattered dignity lying at their feet. Something inside her chest trembled. Not quite healing, but perhaps the beginning of it. The Duke escorted her toward the carriage. Rain continued falling. The crowd parted before them. Some watched with outrage, others with curiosity, a few with shame. At the carriage door, Eleanor hesitated. "Why are you doing this?" Sebastian was silent for a moment. Then he answered quietly, "Because I buried someone I loved." The word surprised her. His eyes drifted toward the rain. And grief teaches a man to recognize suffering when he sees it. For the first time, Eleanor saw the wound he carried, the loneliness, the sorrow, the emptiness that never quite left his eyes. Then he helped her into the carriage. As the horses began moving, Blackthorn Crossing disappeared behind sheets of rain. Neither spoke for several minutes. The journey unfolded in silence. Then the carriage struck a bump. A small bundle slipped from Eleanor's worn traveling bag. Several folded papers scattered across the seat. Sebastian reached down to help gather them. One document caught his attention. Its broken seal bore the crest of Lord Nathaniel Graves, a name Eleanor had hoped never to see again. The Duke unfolded the paper. His expression changed instantly. The words inside appeared to shake even him. Slowly, very slowly, he lifted his eyes toward Eleanor. And for the first time since leaving the town square, real danger entered the carriage. The journey to Hawthorne Manor lasted through the night. Rain battered the carriage roof, while darkness swallowed the countryside beyond the windows. Inside, only a small lantern illuminated the space between Duke Sebastian Hawthorne and Lady Eleanor Ashcombe. Neither spoke immediately after the letter was discovered. The silence felt different now. Not awkward, not hostile, heavy with questions. Sebastian held the document carefully, reading it again beneath the lantern's glow. The broken seal bore Lord Nathaniel Graves' crest, but it was the contents that disturbed him. A private instruction, a payment record, evidence that someone had been rewarded shortly before Eleanor's trial. Not enough to clear her name, but enough to suggest a conspiracy. Enough to prove that doubt existed where certainty had once stood. At last, Sebastian folded the paper. "How long have you possessed this?" Eleanor looked toward the rain-streaked window. "Since the week before my arrest." "And you never showed it to anyone?" A faint, bitter smile touched her lips. "I did." Sebastian frowned. "What happened?" They laughed. The answer lingered between them. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. Too ordinary. Eleanor had spent months learning how little people wished to hear truths that challenged their favorite scandal. The Duke stared at the folded letter, then at the exhausted woman sitting across from him. A woman who had lost everything. A woman who still, somehow, carried herself with grace. And for the first time since his wife's death, Sebastian felt something stir inside the walls he had built around his heart. Not affection. Not yet. Respect. Deep and growing respect. The carriage rolled onward through the darkness. By dawn, the towers of Hawthorne Manor appeared through the morning mist. The estate rose above rolling hills like something from an old painting. Gray stone walls, towering chimneys, endless gardens sleeping beneath autumn fog. Eleanor stared through the window. Months earlier she would have admired its beauty. Now she simply wondered whether she truly belonged anywhere anymore. The carriage stopped. Servants hurried forward. The great doors opened. Warm golden light spilled across the front steps. For a moment Eleanor remained seated. The size of the house frightened her less than the kindness waiting inside it. Cruelty had become familiar. Compassion felt dangerous. Sebastian noticed her hesitation. "You are safe here." The words were simple, yet something in his voice made her believe them. For the first time in many months, she stepped into a place where no one looked at her with disgust. No one whispered. No one pointed. No one demanded explanations. The servants bowed respectfully. Nothing more, nothing less. It nearly brought her to tears. Days passed, then weeks. Slowly, life settled into a rhythm. Eleanor occupied a quiet suite overlooking the eastern gardens. Each morning, she woke to birdsong instead of insults. Each evening, she dined in a candlelit room instead of cage. The changes felt unreal, yet the wounds remained. Healing moved slowly. Sometimes she woke from nightmares convinced she was still trapped behind iron bars. Sometimes she avoided mirrors because she no longer recognized the woman staring back. And sometimes she sat alone for hours wondering how many people had truly believed the lies. More than once, Sebastian found her in the library during these moments. Neither of them enjoyed crowded rooms. Neither enjoyed loud conversation. Loneliness had become a language they both understood. One evening, they sat opposite each other beside a crackling fireplace. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Inside, golden firelight danced across rows of books. Sebastian closed the volume he had been reading. "You have not touched your tea." Eleanor glanced down. The cup sat untouched beside her chair. "I forgot it was there. You think too much." She smiled faintly. "And you do not think enough?" "On the contrary." He leaned back. "I think far too much." A quiet laugh escaped her. The sound surprised both of them. It was the first genuine laugh she had produced in months. Sebastian looked up. For a brief moment, the sadness left her face. The sight lingered in his thoughts long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, his investigation continued. Discreetly, patiently, letters were sent. Witnesses were located. Records were examined. The deeper Sebastian searched, the more troubling the truth became. Too many testimonies had appeared suddenly. Too many officials had received unexpected payments. Too many people had benefited from Eleanor's downfall. One afternoon, a former household servant from Lord Nathaniel Graves' estate arrived secretly at Hawthorne Manor. The young woman was terrified. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I never wanted to lie." Sebastian listened carefully. The confession lasted nearly an hour. By the end, the picture had become horrifyingly clear. Nathaniel Graves had orchestrated everything. The false witnesses, the forged documents, the rumors, the bribes, all because Eleanor had refused him. A woman's rejection had wounded his pride, so he destroyed her life. When the servant finished speaking, silence filled the room. Eleanor sat motionless, not shocked, not surprised, only exhausted, because she had known. Deep down, she had always known. The confession simply gave shape to a nightmare she had already lived. Afterward, she wandered into the gardens alone. The autumn air felt cool against her skin. Leaves drifted across winding stone paths. She walked aimlessly until she reached a small marble bench beneath an ancient oak tree. There she finally allowed herself to cry. Not dramatic sobs, not hysterics, quiet tears, the kind that come when pain grows tired. Several minutes later, footsteps approached. Sebastian sat beside her without speaking. For a while, they simply watched leaves fall. Then Eleanor wiped her eyes. "I keep wondering whether I could have prevented it. No, I should have seen what he was becoming. No, I should have. No." His voice carried unexpected firmness. She looked at him. The Duke met her gaze steadily. "You are not responsible for another person's cruelty." The words struck deeper than he intended, because no one had ever said them before. Not once. Eleanor stared at him, then looked away quickly. The kindness felt almost unbearable. A week later, another surprise arrived. A small velvet box. No note accompanied it. Only her name. Confused, Eleanor opened it. Inside rested a silver locket. Her breath caught instantly. The locket had belonged to her mother. It had disappeared during her arrest. For months, she believed it lost forever. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside remained 2 tiny portraits. Her parents, still smiling, still together, still watching over her. Tears filled her eyes. Moments later, she found Sebastian standing in the library. "You found it." His tone sounded almost casual. She stared at him. "You searched for this?" "I had assistance." "Why?" The Duke paused, as though searching for the proper answer. Finally, he said quietly, "Because some things deserve to be returned." Emotion tightened her throat. For several seconds, she could not speak. Then she whispered, "Thank you." That evening the fire burned low as they sat together once more. The manor had grown quiet. Only the ticking of a clock disturbed the silence. Eleanor stared into the flames. After a long pause, she spoke. "After enough people call you a monster, part of you begins wondering whether they might be right." The confession escaped before she could stop it. The room fell silent. Sebastian looked at her, truly looked. Then he set aside his book. "Then allow me the privilege of being the first man in years to tell you the truth." She met his gaze. "What truth, your grace?" His expression softened. "That goodness survives slander far better than slander survives truth." For a moment, neither looked away. The fire crackled softly. The world beyond the manor seemed very far away. Then a servant entered carrying an urgent letter. Sebastian opened it immediately. His eyes narrowed as he read. The evidence was complete. Witnesses, confessions, financial records, everything necessary to expose Lord Nathaniel Graves. Everything necessary to restore Eleanor's name. But there was a problem. The Graves family possessed enormous influence. Powerful allies, political connections reaching deep into the highest circles of society. Revealing the truth would ignite a public war. A dangerous one. Slowly, Sebastian folded the letter. Eleanor saw the determination forming behind his eyes. The battle for her reputation was finally within reach. But winning it might cost the Duke everything. And for the first time, she feared not for herself, but for the man who had chosen to stand beside her. Winter arrived early that year. A thin layer of frost covered the gardens of Hawthorne Manor, turning every hedge and rosebush silver beneath the pale morning sun. The world appeared peaceful, but inside the manor, preparations for battle had already begun. Not a battle fought with swords, a battle fought with truth. For weeks, Duke Sebastian Hawthorne gathered evidence with relentless patience. Witnesses who had once hidden behind fear finally stepped forward. Servants confessed. Financial records emerged. Letters surfaced. One by one, the lies surrounding Lady Eleanor Ashcombe began collapsing beneath the weight of facts. Still, exposing Lord Nathaniel Graves would not be simple. The Graves family possessed wealth, influence, and generations of political power. Many advised Sebastian to abandon the matter. Some warned him privately. Others threatened him openly. Yet the Duke never wavered. Perhaps grief had taught him something powerful. A man who had already lost the person he loved feared very little afterward. The invitation arrived 2 weeks before Christmas. A royal winter gala hosted by some of the kingdom's most influential aristocrats. Nearly every noble family would attend. So would judges, magistrates, newspaper editors, and members of parliament. Exactly the audience Sebastian needed. The evening finally arrived. Thousands of candles illuminated the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead like frozen stars. Music floated through the air. Diamonds flashed. Silk gowns swept across polished marble floors. Behind every elegant smile lurked whispered gossip. Many guests had already heard rumors. The disgraced Duchess was attending. Some believed it impossible. Others came specifically to witness the spectacle. The moment Eleanor entered the ballroom, conversation faltered. Heads turned. Fans stopped fluttering. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. She stood at the top of the staircase wearing a gown of deep sapphire silk. No jewels, no extravagant ornaments. She needed none. Dignity had become more beautiful than decoration. The room stared. Months earlier they had watched her rot inside a cage. Now she descended a marble staircase beside one of the most respected men in England. Sebastian offered his arm. She accepted. Neither looked toward the crowd. Neither acknowledged the whispers. Together, they crossed the ballroom. And for the first time since her nightmare began, Eleanor felt no desire to hide. The evening progressed. Music played. Conversations resumed. But tension lingered beneath the elegance. Everyone sensed something approaching. Then, shortly before midnight, Sebastian stepped onto the raised platform near the orchestra. The musicians fell silent. The ballroom gradually quieted. Curious faces turned toward him. The Duke surveyed the crowd. His expression remained calm, yet those who knew him recognized the steel beneath it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. The room became perfectly still. "There is a matter that requires correction." The words echoed through the ballroom. Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Sebastian continued. "For many months, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe has endured accusations that destroyed her reputation, her position, and nearly her life." Silence deepened. The Duke produced several documents. The accusations were false. A collective gasp swept across the room. Sebastian did not pause. He presented financial records, witness statements, signed confessions, letters. Each piece of evidence struck like a hammer. Every revelation exposed another layer of deception. Every fact tightened the noose around Nathaniel Graves. Faces grew pale. Newspaper editors hurriedly took notes. Judges examined copies of documents. Aristocrats whispered furiously among themselves. Then came the final witness, the former servant who had helped orchestrate the scheme. Standing before the entire ballroom, she described everything: the forged evidence, the bribery, the threats, the vengeance of a rejected man determined to destroy the woman who refused him. By the time she finished, no doubt remained. Lord Nathaniel Graves stood near the center of the ballroom. His face had gone white. For months, he had hidden behind influence. Now influence could not save him. The truth had become public, and truth, once released, rarely returned to its cage. The crowd slowly turned toward him, not with admiration, with disgust. The same society that had condemned Eleanor now condemned him. Nathaniel opened his mouth as though to defend himself. No words emerged. He understood. His power was finished. His reputation destroyed. His name would forever be attached to scandal. Exactly as he had intended for Eleanor. Guards quietly approached. Moments later, he was escorted from the ballroom. The enormous doors closed behind him. Silence followed. The kind of silence that appears when an entire room realizes it has been wrong. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Sebastian looked toward Eleanor. His voice softened. The shame was never hers. Many guests lowered their eyes. Some appeared genuinely ashamed. Others simply feared being associated with the injustice. But none could deny the truth. The cruelty had never belonged to Eleanor. It had belonged to those who chose gossip over compassion. Sebastian descended from the platform. The ballroom watched every step. He stopped before Eleanor. Neither spoke immediately. Their eyes met. Months of pain, months of healing, months of quiet conversations beside fireplaces. All of it seemed to exist within that single moment. Then the Duke did something no one expected. He knelt. Gasps echoed throughout the room. A duke did not kneel lightly. Not before nobles. Not before society. Not before anyone. Yet Sebastian Hawthorne knelt before Eleanor Ashcombe. The entire ballroom stared. His voice remained steady. "I did not rescue you, Eleanor." Tears filled her eyes. "You rescued something in me that grief had buried." The room vanished. Only his words remained. "I have admired your courage." His gaze never left hers. "I have admired your kindness." Her hands trembled. "I have admired your strength." Emotion tightened his voice. "And somewhere between admiration and friendship, I discovered love." Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. Not tears of sorrow. Not anymore. The Duke reached for her hand. "Eleanor Ashcombe, would you honor me by becoming Duchess of Hawthorne?" The ballroom seemed to stop breathing. For months, society had treated her as an outcast. Now one of the kingdom's most respected men was offering her his name, his heart, and his future. Not from pity, from love. Eleanor looked down at him. Then she smiled. A real smile. The first completely unburdened smile she had worn in years. "Yes, Your Grace." Applause erupted instantly. Guests rose to their feet. The orchestra began playing once more. But neither Eleanor nor Sebastian seemed to hear any of it. For several seconds, they simply stood together, at peace. Finally, the wedding took place in spring. The kingdom could speak of little else. Yet the greatest moment arrived months later. Eleanor returned to Blackthorn Crossing. The same town, the same square, The same place where suffering had become entertainment. The cage was gone. The hateful sign was gone. The mockery was gone. In their place stood a beautiful charitable home for abandoned women and children. A refuge, a sanctuary, a second chance. Where rusted iron once stood, rose gardens now bloomed. Dozens of women found shelter there. Dozens of children found hope there. The town could never erase what it had done, but it could choose what came next. One evening, as the sun painted the horizon gold, Eleanor walked through the garden beside Sebastian. Roses swayed gently in the breeze. Laughter drifted from the nearby home. Life flourished where cruelty once ruled. Sebastian squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. Ahead of them stretched a future neither had expected. Behind them lay a cage that no longer existed. And perhaps that was fitting, because the town had built iron bars for a lie. But truth, like love, had proven stronger than iron. And at last, both had set them free.